Hello and welcome to I Helped Make That. It's me again, your host, Kevin Higgins. Before we begin, let us get the anchor ad out of the way. So, do you want to create your own podcast, but you don't know how? If you do, try Anchor today because Anchor is the easiest podcasting platform to use. All you do is sign up for an account, then you can post on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all those platforms. So, if you want to try to create your own podcast, try Anchor today. So, Zev, let me introduce you to our audience. Zev-Starr Tambor is a cinematographer, so we're going to learn a little bit about cinematography today, who worked on the documentary Stop, which was about Floyd versus the case of New York. Thanks for coming on, Zev.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So, first things first, how did you become a cinematographer?
So I studied astronomy in college at Dartmouth College and in high school as well at St. Paul's School. And one of the elements of the study of astronomy at the time that I was doing it was photographing the stars through the telescopes. And this being a long time ago, we had Hasselblad film cameras mounted on the backs of the telescopes. So to begin my study of astronomy, I had to first learn how to focus the cameras, load the films, process the films, develop the film, make prints. And that was sort of like a precursor to studying the stars, the subject. But I had all of that experience. And when I graduated college, I eventually moved back to New York City, where I had lived when I was very young. And I decided I wanted to pursue work as a cinematographer. And I started by assisting a documentary cinematographer named Mark Benjamin, who is now a producer, director, cinematographer, cameraman. He does all of those jobs. And that's how I started, loading film for him, carrying tripods, carrying lights, setting up lights, running film to the lab. That's how I started.
So, in that experience, what was it about cinematography that appealed to you?
I love and loved the very practical elements of creating something and using all of the skills to capture what's in front of you, but not just to capture it and render it like a videographer. A videographer would capture and render. For example, this podcast is being captured and rendered, right? Like we're here. But not really that much thought has been given into, there's no movement of the camera, there's no changing of focal length, there's no lighting changes, so I really embraced the art and the science of the language of the camera and how that can influence a story.
Okay. Now, how did you become involved in today's subject, the documentary Stop?
So Spencer Wolf and I have collaborated on a lot of projects, film projects, short films, and of course, Stop. We used to be lifeguards together. We both lifeguarded in the Hamptons. We were both swimmers in college. And he started in on this project, Stop, which was a multi-year project for him. And he asked me to shoot it. And I, amongst a few other people, we shot that film with him. So I took the job and the responsibility of helping Spencer with ideas for cinematography of how to tell the story, not just capture the story, but to enhance the story through cinematography.
All right. So, how did Spencer become involved in making this documentary? Like, what inspired him to make it?
Spencer, he is very, very, very sympathetic to legal issues. He's a lawyer, been to law school. He doesn't practice law that much, so he studied law. And this intersection of, first of all, it's a New York City story. He's a born and bred New Yorker like I am, so it's a hometown story for him and for me. And the social issues, where a big segment of our population here in New York is being treated truly unfairly with this New York City policy of stop and frisk. And then, more specifically, this subject, David Auerlicht, lives very close to both me and Spencer. Spencer lives about, I don't know, a 5 minute walk from me. And David Auerlicht, who's the subject of Stop, he lives like a 12-minute walk from me. So it's an issue that's literally in our backyards.
Okay. So, when you were the cinematographer of Stop, could you tell me a bit more about how you helped shape the cinematography of the documentary?
Yeah. So some of the tools over time have changed since we did Stop. I think Stop was like 2014. So,
Hmm.
and it was a couple of years of shooting. So maybe we started in 2011. I'm not sure, something like that. So the tools I'm referencing, they're now old tools. For example, we shot a lot of it on a 5D Mark II. At the time, shooting documentary content on a DSLR was sort of radical. I mean, not cutting edge, but close to the cutting edge. So to get that minimum depth of field, to be able to mimic established 35 millimeter film look as best as we could, but with something that we could afford on a low budget dock, which is the 5D Mark II and the Canon lenses, which I already had. And to be able to use depth of field and depth of focus to help tell the story and rack focus when necessary. So the first step was choosing that tool, the 5D Mark II at the time. I think at some point during the film, we upgraded to a 5D Mark III because it came out, I believe, if I remember correctly, while we were shooting. So we used those two cameras as our primary way to capture. And the use of wide lenses on the establishing shots to really give context and close-ups on dramatic moments of David's speech and so on. Those are the choices that I like to add as a cinematographer. And plus, as sort of a technical thing, I had recently purchased a very collapsible crane, like a jib arm, which added a lot to our establishing shots to really give sweeping views of the city. So not just locked off shots, and you're not allowed to fly a drone in New York, so that wasn't really an option. So this gave us an element of something, where we could come down from like the courthouse and down into the crowds when there were protests in front of the courthouse, and really give our audience some really nice cinematic flourishes to really enhance the story and elevate the whole production. Because if too much of the production is handheld, you know, kind of like shaky dock footage, it can cheapen the overall effect. But whereas when you can start to add in some of these nicer elements, you can really make it feel like a production and you can add weight to what you're trying to say.
All right. So, when you were filming the movie, what was it like dealing with all of the people that you had to, that, not you, but that were being interviewed? What was it like filming in, all of the locations you did? Like, could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, um, I'd like to start with our most sort of dramatic moment of filmmaking, in my opinion. So, the story is David Auerlicht was stopped and frisked and arrested in front of his home in Union Square. That's what happened. That happened. There was no film yet, so this wasn't recorded. And we just have his account. So we filmed his account of it. When we decided to film his account, we said, let's go back to the scene of the crime, not his crime, but actually the police officers, maybe crime is wrong, or indiscretion or abuse of power, it would be my way of putting it, because they arrested a kid going into his own lobby, which is like, why did they do that? We speculate that he lives in Union Square, which is, a pretty nice neighborhood, upscale, mostly white, and he's a mulatto kid, and he's going in this place, and the cops, according to David Arlick's account, they looked at him like a fish out of water. So as he's trying to go into his own building, his own home, they stop him.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, all right, David, we got it. Let's tell us this story in front of your lobby, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we get David and one of his friends who's going to play the cops, and we start filming, and David's lawyer is there. And as we're filming, and he's telling the account of how the cops just came and stopped him out of nothing, two cops come right up to him and stop him.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same cops, not related. They just see him, and somehow they're magnetically attract him. And even though we have his lawyer there, and even though I'm filming, and I think Spencer was actually doing the audio because it's a small production, so he was the director slash audio slash whatever has to be done. So during the making of this reenactment of his stop and frisk, he gets stopped and frisked on camera. And we look to the lawyer as if well, there's a lawyer here. He's going to know what to do or say to these cops. And the lawyer ran away, which I was like, okay, now I'm here filming. Spencer's there looking at me, and I'm like, let's just keep filming this. So if you watch the doc, you'll see the scene. The scene plays out. The cops are like, we want to go into this building. And David says, this is my home building. And the cops say, okay, let us in. And Dave says, I'm not going to let you into my building. So they say, oh, so you're trying to stop us from doing our job. I was like, I'm not trying to stop you to do anything. Go ahead, go in, right? And so they come full on at him with this aggressive demeanor. And ironically, we were there to reenact an earlier incident of him being aggressed for being basically a mulatto kid in a white neighborhood. And the fact that the cameras were there did not faze these police officers at all. They just came right in, boom. They didn't ask me any questions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an example of a negative, well, very negative interaction you had with the interviewees. Is there a
Yeah.
more positive one you can think of?
Well, actually, for me, that was extremely positive in some way because it illustrated the tension of what we were trying to get at, which is for someone who is colored or mulatto or black or looks different in some neighborhoods of New York, the police can be what's dangerous to you. And we caught that on film. So for me, that was incredible. Other than that, in a more gentle fashion, after that, David invited us into his home. We interviewed his mom. We interviewed his father to get
Mhm.
their perspective of the subject of the film, which was David Arlick's suit against the New York City and the NYPD.
Mhm. And what was it like interacting with them?
They're a lovely family. They really opened themselves up to us, and they opened up our home, and they said the good and the bad, let's say, or not bad, but what it was like raising David, because he has a white mother, he has a
Mhm.
black father, and he's obviously mulatto. So in some ways, he's not included in two elements of society, even though he can be partially included in both. And this is me recounting his telling. This is really David's story. It's not, that part's not my story. My job was there when I'm in that type of situation is
Mhm.
to be invisible and to set up the camera with the least fuss possible, to set up the
Mhm.
light the least fuss possible, but still flattering to the subjects because you want them to look good and feel comfortable on the camera. And in those cases, I feel like cinematography is like the art of being as invisible as possible. Like I try not to modify the scene in any way with my energy, like fussing with the camera. It's more about like precision. Like I know exactly how to set it up, I know exactly how I want to light it.
Mm-hmm.
I gently shake everybody's hands in the room, and then I sit back as far as I can quietly and allow them to tell their story. So that's it. That's a different kind of cinematography. It's very specific to the documentary genre. Like, get in, find the location, do not interfere with the scene, and do not energetically interfere with the subject. And in this case, Spencer was the director. Spencer was doing the interview. In my opinion, when you're in this role as a cinematographer, you want to be just like a plant in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and let none of your energy get in between the subject and the director, so that when they form the connection and tell the story, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit off frame, and I have all the technical elements in place to capture what unfolds.
Okay. So now just to make sure, you were doing the documentary, sorry, you were doing the cinematography for a
Yes,
documentary,
yes,
and you've also done the cinematography for fiction, more narrative works as well, if I'm right.
yes, yes, absolutely, yes.
Like, what would you say is the difference between doing cinematography for a documentary and cinematography for more narrative works?
Yeah. So when you're doing a documentary cinematography, a lot of the choices are made for you, and your job is to be extremely flexible and to make something beautiful, whatever it is. For example, if you're doing a documentary in a prison cell, which is something I've done many times working with Mark Benjamin, um, you've got a limited amount of equipment you can bring into a specific specified space at a specific time, and you've got to have all the elements to tell your story. So that's the extreme on the documentary side. This David Auerlicht, the doc stop that we're talking about that I did with Spencer, that's the middle ground. There's some elements we could control, like we could have David come by. He could have come by the studio. I have a studio over here. We could have done it in studio, or we could have done it in his home. So we have a little more control over the elements. In a narrative film, you have absolute control because you are creating everything. You are choosing the locations.
Hmm.
You're choosing the color palette. If you don't like something in the room, you can change the room. You can choose the time of day. So all of those elements make narrative filmmaking a lot more fun in some ways,
Hmm.
because your limits really then are your budget and your time.
Hmm.
Whereas in a doc film, you have other limits. Your limits are what your subject wants, or where the events took place or are taking place. If there's a protest like we shot for Stop and it's in front of City Hall, New York, that's the location. It's not like I can say, oh, I don't like this location on this day. Let's wait for a sunny day. It's like, no, the protest is happening on that day there. So those creative elements are gone from you.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I'll say this. I learned a lot about the Floyd versus New York case thanks to this documentary. A lot I didn't know beforehand. Actually, probably most of the things I've learned about this case are from this documentary. I just knew a tangential bit about it. So, yeah, thank you for making it. Was that your and Stefan's basically basic want for this documentary was to teach people about the case and also make them more aware?
Yeah, 100%, to bring light to the fact that um, there's a big population of New York City society that really suffers from this policy stop and frisk.
Hmm.
And the counter argument from the NYPD is like, hey, look, we're stopping and frisking people we're getting guns off the streets, and which is true. They will from time to time stop and frisk someone, and maybe they catch somebody who had a warrant, or maybe somebody does have a weapon. But in order to accomplish that, how many hundreds of people or thousands of people
Hmm.
have you violated their rights, made them feel uncomfortable, and more specifically, they're targeting the
Hmm.
African American community. So
Hmm.
it just wasn't right.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I learned a lot from the documentary. I hope more people watch it and learn a lot from it as well. It is on Amazon a bit. Admittedly, it was a little hard to find. I had to look stop like I think it was like I had to search stop 2014
Oh
under
yeah.
movies and TV. But I would recommend it if you want to learn more about this case. Before we go, though, Zev, I know that you quickly wanted to promote a new movie you had. Could you tell
Oh,
us more about that?
yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be another collaboration with Spencer.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer's living in Paris at this exact moment. And we shot another short film together. This was an indie narrative film that we did called Paris Tu me fais chier. And in the shooting of that film, I met a vampire in Paris, which sounds absolutely ridiculous. However, I don't know that she was truly a vampire, but it was somebody who doesn't sleep
Mm-hmm.
and never sleeps. So I wrote a little kind of funny story, a film within a film about this Estonian vampire in Paris. And that's all. It's something to look out for. It's going to be a future collaboration with me and Spencer. We're going to shoot this summer.
Okay. Well, before we go, do you have anything else to promote?
That's it. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that was I Help Make That, and I'll see you all later.
Fight the power! Fight the power!